Welcome to the Modernize or Die podcast, CFML News Edition, where we keep you up to date with everything going on in the ColdFusion community. We'll share the latest news on events, releases to engines, frameworks, libraries, and tools, as well as spotlighting quality content from the community.
Welcome to the Modernize or Die podcast, CFML News Edition. Today is March 23rd, 2021. My name is Eric Peterson, and I'm joined by Mr. Brad Wood. How you doing, Brad?
I'm doing great. I put on my finest vintage ColdFusion t-shirt, but this desk is so tall, I don't think I can even see it, so wasted effort.
So how vintage is this ColdFusion t-shirt? How old
I
is
think
this?
I think it might actually be from one of the first CF summits. It's got the angle brackets with a lightning bolt. It's just my guess.
Now, CF Summit's not been going on terribly long, right? Like CF 11 era?
It was tongue-in-cheek when I said vintage.
Okay.
It probably says in the back, but I can't read the back of the shirt right now. So, do we have the monkey cam in the studio that can get that angle?
I was going to say, you could just turn around and then our whole live audience could tell you what's on the back of your shirt in the chat. But we'll skip that. So we want to say thank you to our sponsor, Ortus Solutions, for sponsoring this podcast. There's a few ways that you can support Ortus Solutions. You can like and subscribe these videos here on YouTube. You can sign up for an account on CFCasts, which releases new content every week that we highlight here on our podcast as well. You can buy our Ortus's new book, 102 ColdBox Quick Tips and Tricks, which is available right now on Gumroad. And finally, we want to thank those who support us via Patreon. You can find more out at patreon.com/OrtusSolutions. We are currently at the 79% funding mark for this podcast. So check that out, those ways to thank our sponsor, and thank you, Ortus Solutions. So let's dive into some news. There are some Adobe ColdFusion updates for a surprising array of engines. We have update 1 for 2021, update 11 for 2018, and even a 2016 update, which is technically out of support, but they still brought some bug fixes, and most importantly, there is a security vulnerability fixed in these updates.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see any more updates for 2016 since it did fall out of support last month. But little gift to the 2016 users, I guess.
So as mentioned, there is a security update. The Twitterverse, specifically the I don't know, it felt like the people who are on LinkedIn with all the different certifications were all retweeting about the security vulnerability without any comments. It was just retweeting.
Well, there's a number of things that always greatly annoy me anytime security vulnerabilities come out. The first of which is that this one there's very little information about. No one really knows what it is. It just is called an input validation. No failure. It doesn't fail input validation, and it simply says it could allow for arbitrary execution of code. But it doesn't say if it's server side or client side. It's like if it's a remote an RCE, remote code execution, then that means it's running on the server. It doesn't really say that. Of course, but people on Twitter are always sort of like jumping over themselves to break the news, and there's articles all sort of editorializing what they think it may be, or here's some CVEs from 3 years ago, maybe it's related to them. I even saw a site, it wasn't ThreatPost, it was one of them, that they claimed that it was a remote code execution and would allow you to, run arbitrary code on the server and take over the server. But those words appeared nowhere in Adobe's actual post. I think they were just copying and pasting just boilerplate verbiage for an input validation exploit. So yeah, a lot of people always take it in the worst light. And of course, I also think Adobe's security team has a habit of rating their security vulnerabilities. They're always 10.0 critical, and it's spelling error fixed or whatever. All the RMI exploits that came out last year, whatever that was, were all 10.0 critical, and I don't think they follow the CVE rating specs. You have to take into account things like accessibility, right? If it's behind a port that's blocked by 99% of all firewalls, then that means you'd have to have some sort of internal hack to get to it, and it wouldn't be a 10.0. But anyway, this was like a 9.8 critical. But the only thing I saw so I did see some tweets of people trying to guess what it was. There's one person that found in a JavaScript file they had changed from using eval to json.parse. But I looked at that code, and there was an RFC compliant regular expression validation happening of the JSON before it was being evaled in the older version. So I was like, unless there was something new that came out that made that exploitable, I don't think that was the I hope that wasn't the critical thing they fixed, because geez, all the bad press just for something that probably wasn't even exploitable. But yeah, I don't know. Be interesting to see. The Adobe did say there's no known exploits happening. So a lot of times, you know, a security researcher, which I don't like it when they do this, but they'll write a whole blog post that's like, this is what the problem was. Hey, hackers, here's how you hack ColdFusion. I hate it when they do that. So I don't know if that'll happen or if this will just stay a mystery. Either way, I mean, the answer is you still upgrade your servers and do it as soon as you can. But I always get a little annoyed watching all the Twitter stuff, because nobody cares about ColdFusion until a security update comes out, and then it's like everyone in the universe retweets it. And then, like, the next day you have the second wave of like, ColdFusion, who uses that crap? So insecure, because look, they had a security update. I'm like, yeah, like every other software in the world. But anyway, it makes me grumpy whenever security updates come out, just because I have to watch Twitter.
The internet comes out with them, yeah. Well, there
are quite a bit of fixes, though. I mean, because like the 2016 patch isn't just the security update. I mean, it had a whole list of bug fixes in it. So, and it did say it would be the last one on the security bulletin. It did say this is all you're getting. So upgrade.
So, yeah, please upgrade. And on that note, there is some great news with this new update 1 for 2021, in that it has unbroken ColdBox on it. So you can run ColdBox on the latest Adobe 2021 now. Yay!
Yes, ColdBox has been broken for like, what, 5 months, I think.
Ever since they released 2021, yeah.
ColdFusion 2021. So that's the big thing. I don't know if any of the performance fixes that Adobe have been working with me on in relation to the Tech and Power benchmarks made it into these updates. I'm afraid they probably didn't, but I know they're probably testing them secretly for weeks before they release them. So
it would be hard to know, because all it says on the update website is bug fixes. We weren't even sure if it had our ColdBox bug fix in there. We had to test that after it came out.
Yeah.
Well, you can. Go ahead.
Oh no, you may have it on the show notes later down. I was just going to say that I know that at least 2 of the CF engines are updated, but I don't know if John. Oh, he does have it. I'm behind on my Slack messages this morning. Yeah, so we do have everything on ForgeBox then.
Yes,
Sweet.
yes, you can spin up all of these updates on ForgeBox 2021, 2018, and 2016. It seems like there might be a possible data source bug in the 2018 that we're looking into, at least on update 11.
Are you talking about the thing I mentioned before that we started the podcast?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. Well, so I just got in the office just a few minutes for the podcast. So I'm still catching up on stuff. I did see some conversations in CFML Slack that looks like CF config may have a breaking change it needs to account for in how the config files are written in some of these new updates that affected data sources. But I think it only mattered if you were using CF config to write configuration. The newer updates expected a slightly different configuration file. I'll look into that as soon as the podcast is over. But I don't know if that's the only problem that's been found or not.
All right. But all in all, good news. Get your updates in, and if you're on 2016, now's the best time to jump, because ColdBox works on 2021. So, a couple other releases this week. We had some fix releases and minor releases of CV Security, which has a fix for getting the originating user source's IP if it's a list. Say you're using Cloudflare, that gives you a lot of different forwarded IPs. And a secure same user method, which lets you pass in a user and it will throw an exception if it's not the logged in user. Good for making sure that the owner of some resource is the same one as the logged in user. Mementifier also got a bug fix which passes mappers and defaults down into nested get memento calls correctly, so you can update those from ForgeBox. Next, let's talk about some of the webinars coming up. It's the last week of the month, which seems to be the week that everybody wants to do webinars. There is one the next 3 days, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Adobe is kicking off their API creation and management webinar tomorrow, the March 24th. You can learn about building RESTful APIs and using the API manager in a, I believe, 7-part series. Yes, I can count. Starts tomorrow, another one on Thursday, and then continuing in April. We'll put the link in the show notes about information, and there's a registration link on that page. Also on Thursday is a Fusion Reactor webinar where you can join Mikey from Fusion Reactor about what are the 5 things you should always check before you release your application. This is Thursday the 25th at 9:30 Pacific time. And we will throw that link in the show notes as well. Lastly, Ortus has our March webinar this Friday, presented by Esme on Vue.js in my ColdBox app. She will walk us through how to integrate Vue.js, some of the fundamentals of Vue.js as well, inside a traditional server application. You can sign up on Ortus's site. You can see all our webinars, past and upcoming, on ortussolutions.com/events/webinars.
Pretty good. We do a lot of Vue stuff at Ortus, so I don't do a lot of Vue stuff, but the people who do front end stuff do a lot of Vue stuff at Ortus. So
we like Vue. We like Vue. And lastly, the Online CF Meetup has an upcoming meetup. Can't think of the word there. On April 15th, it is with Mr. Luis Mahano talking about CB Futures. This is the
title. To the future with CB Futures. It needs to be like a Buzz Lightyear kind of thing, I think.
That's why I left it for you. I couldn't do that justice.
To the futures and beyond.
So this is going over the asynchronous and parallel programming constructs that we have built into ColdBox 6. I've used a few of these, and they are quite fun and can greatly speed up your application. The place I've reached for a lot is running multiple queries, whether database queries or hitting an API in parallel, and getting all the responses back. So instead of having this, waterfall approach where I have 6 requests that need to go, all of a sudden they all go at once and cut the time way down. So
I think that's one of the most accessible features of it. Not accessible, one of the most useful things. It obviously, CB Futures has like a billion different, things it does. And some of them you might think like, oh, well, I could do that with CF Thread. But, like what you just said, you have a page and you got to run like 6 queries, and it doesn't matter what order they're run in. Well, heck, run them all at the same time. And the amount of boilerplate code that it takes to do that with CB Futures is actually pretty small. If you have, your code structured nicely and you can just say, here's, 5 items, run them all at once. Let me know when they're all done. You can do that with CF Thread. I think it's a lot uglier. CB Futures is really nice.
Yes, it is. And you can do a lot more with CB Futures than you can with threads or run async out of the box. And so that is going to be a great meetup. I believe all the async stuff also is in Wirebox standalone, so you don't have to use ColdBox to get it.
It's technically in any of the standalone products because they all share that core folder, the system core folder that's in ColdBox. And the next version of commandbox will have the async manager in it because ColdBox uses Wirebox, and I've updated to the latest version of Wirebox in the next version of commandbox. And I actually already have some integrations in place to start using the async manager. And one of the first places I'm going to use it in commandbox is places where I need to redraw the screen, like when you're installing and stuff is kind of scrolling down. Instead of redrawing the screen like a billion times a second as stuff is coming in, I'll just start off a little thread that just runs every 100 milliseconds and just redraws the screen, and I can stop it when I'm done. And so I already have some use cases for Async Manager that
Nice.
I get via Wirebox in the command box.
I gotta imagine parallel downloading of packages is on the radar as well.
That's definitely something we've talked about. What's tricky about that is that there's the catch-22 where you can't build out the entire like graph of dependencies that you're going to install without actually like downloading the intermediate ones. If they're on ForgeBox, we could define some way where we could just ask ForgeBox what dependencies does CBRM have without actually downloading CBRM, unpacking this box.json and looking at it. But it doesn't always work if you're installing a package from GitHub or things like that. So we would have to have like either first pass where we like downloaded everything and then figured out if we had everything and then installed it, which really wouldn't be as cool. Or we would have to say, well, if we at least know we need these 6 things, let's do them in parallel and then recurse down once we get past that. But it is tricky to know what you need to download ahead of time until you've already started downloading things. But I definitely would like to parallelize some of the installation stuff, that's for sure.
Some exciting stuff coming down the pipeline. And you can learn how to do some of those similar things in your application in that Online CF Meetup, Thursday, April 15th.
Good way to circle back, that was good.
We're going to throw in the link again because this book is amazing. 102 ColdBox HMVC quick tips and tricks on Gumroad. Only $29. You can own your own digital copy. You can go to gum.co/coldbox-tips.
A fun tip, this was originally going to be 100. But, you know, Luis, he's a more is more guy, and there's always that, and much, much more bullet point at the bottom. So he had to sweeten the deal and make it 102 just because.
Yeah, I like how it's not 101. That sounds like the other number, right?
The Dalmatians, yeah. 101 Dalmatians.
This is the sequel, 102.
It's one better.
Great. All right, let's go over our CFCasts updates this week. We are continuing releasing our CommandBox Zero to Hero workshop this week about creating a package. So all the great packages you've been using CommandBox, you can learn how to make your own here. I love CommandBox packages, by the way. I was messing around with CommandBox migrations the other day, and just having one folder of commands is such a nice entry point. So, also we have some updates to our Spanish content, if that is your language of choice. 2 new videos in there. I wish I could tell you what it's about without Google Translate, but
It looks like HTML adequate, but I'm just guessing. Etiquetas HTML. Estructura base de una página HTML. I'm just guessing. I don't know what that actually says. Structure of something HTML page is my guess. But if you speak Spanish, you too can learn whatever that is.
And all our wonderful listeners, this is exactly what you came for, to hear Brad and Eric trying to figure out Spanish on this podcast.
I believe this is called Diseño Web. I don't know what Diseño means, though.
Here goes Google Translate for Brad. Coming up, also, we still have more CommandBox Zero to Hero. And
web design. Yeah, it's so obvious when you see it. Diseños. It's Diseño. Design, yo. That's what we're doing. All right, sorry. What were you saying?
No worries. We have more CommandBox Zero to Hero coming up, as well as our Up and Running with Quick workshop is currently being edited. As mentioned, I believe last week, using DocBox is coming to talk about DocBox 2.0. And we have a yet untitled Logbox 101 or Intro to Logbox course coming, which I'm very excited about. I'm doing that one myself. And I'm very excited about it because I can't tell you how many times I will refer to my own videos when this is done, because Logbox configuration is one that I just never get right the first time. So I'm excited for a video resource for that. If you have ideas, you can send your suggestions to us at cfcast.com/support. Okay, on to some conferences. I don't believe we have any new ones, but we'll go over the ones that are coming up here. April 14th, which is the day before the ColdFusion meetup with CB Futures, is ViewConf. It is a free online conference for Vue.js, which we mentioned at Ortus Solutions. We very much love Vue.js. You can find out more information at vueconf.us.
So there's a live DJ, but it's a virtual conference.
Yeah, when they had that and virtual party, I was just kind of, I don't know, that's something I go to a conference in person, I guess.
Yeah.
I go to a conference in person to avoid these parties. Come on.
I always like the parties because just the one time a day you get to stop and talk to people. And then they're always like, let's have the loudest musicians you've ever heard for 2 hours. And you're like screaming in the back of the room trying to talk about, ColdFusion programming or whatever. And then your voice is hoarse the next day. Every time at ColdFusion Summit, it happens that way. Or
you come to Into the Box, where we have a small section of a mariachi band. And the rest is not loud, crazy music in your ears.
But you do have to listen to Jorge sing during the mariachi band.
You get to listen to him sing.
Sorry, yes.
It is a privilege. That is why you buy your ticket.
Oh my.
All right.
What's next?
We have RedisConf, April 20th and 21st. Atlassian Teams 21, if you are using any of those Atlassian products, which is April 28th and 30th. So looks like a lot of April conferences coming up. And
Jira is Atlassian, so if you've put in a ticket to any box thing or any Lucy thing, you've probably used an Atlassian product.
And finally, DockerCon coming up in May 27th. You can pre-register for that one. We will throw all those links into the show notes and into the chat. Finally, there are some more workshops that Ortus has planned. The dates are coming soon for commandbox 0 to hero, ColdBox 0 to hero, and ColdBox hero to superhero. I'm still waiting for Ortus to write the ColdBox superhero to demigod, or whatever the next step is.
Yeah, they kind of set the bar pretty high. Where is there to go next?
Superhero to Avenger. I don't know. We got to worry about copyright there, though, probably. Anyway.
Look at our conference t-shirts. Since when have we cared about copyright?
Shh. YouTube, don't strike us. Okay. If you are looking for other conferences, you can go to comps.tech. You can even search by language. CFML is on that list. And you can find any conference to your heart's delight. There are a lot of free online conferences available right now.
David Bellinger says superhero to Luis. That's the God mode.
I mean, there's nowhere you can go past that. Like, now we can only have 3 levels.
You become Luis. But there can only be one, so it has to be like a death match or something at the end.
Superhero to Luis, and then Luis to... what? See? To Super Saiyan Luis. I don't know.
Super Saiyan. I want to see what the hair looks like. Can we get our Photoshop team on that? They need a Super
goodness.
Saiyan Luis.
Yes, I want to see that. Okay. Let's go to our blogs, tweets, and videos of the week. Our first blog post, and we have quite a few, I'll just tell you, we've tried to space them, but Ben Nadal has been busy, as is usual, and we love it, don't get us wrong. The first one is talking about Docker for Mac File I.O. So this is in relation to Ben's project creating a custom tag language for HTML emails, and if you remember a couple weeks ago he ran into the snag where it was dirt slow with the CF import tag and he wasn't quite sure how to get around that. Well, turns out he probably doesn't need to get around it because his Docker for Mac File I.O. is 68 times slower than running this on their Kubernetes pod. So
I saw this post and I hadn't read it. What I was unclear on is if the file access that was 68 times slower was local to the container, or if it was part of a mount that was actually going through some translation layer to his underlying Mac file system.
My guess is there's some mounting things there. I know that Docker in general and Docker for Mac specifically, you can do a lot of different things with your volume mounts to make that fast. But we're talking on, an average of 12 seconds down to an average of 175 milliseconds. on some of these calls. So
yeah, I would almost bet that he has his source code, which is what he's obviously testing, mapped through to a local, folder, and it's going through some translation layer. I know on Windows, I've seen some pretty terrible times as well, using either Vagrant, anything through VirtualBox, basically that's like a map drive, whether it's Vagrant or Docker. I've seen some pretty terrible times when you're mapping stuff through, and it's the kind of thing where just hitting the file once, it's the difference between nanoseconds and a few milliseconds, but all of a sudden you do something that hits 1,000 files 1,000 times, and 68 times slower.
Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what CF import does under the hood, but I know I ran into performance issues whenever I wrote a lot of files out.
If I recall,
that syncing that was taking forever.
If I recall, he had a blog post on what it was a few weeks ago, because Zach had helped with him, and I think there was like a file exists check that happens every time you import the file. So even with Trusted Cache on, because I had commented on that post, even with Trusted Cache on, even if the CFM file itself is compiled as a class file, before it even gets to that point, there was still does the CFM even exist? That happened every time you did an import, which if you did it a couple times in a page, who cares? But he was doing it like inside of tight loops and thousands of times, and then that file system overhead really added up.
Right. So that is good news, and it's also something to remember using Docker is if you are doing some performance profiling, do it on the system that you're going to be running it on, just to make sure. So,
yep.
Okay, next one, we have a video up. We've probably talked about this one as it was part of the Mid-Michigan ColdFusion users group, but it is a video on building a Microsoft Teams app with CFML. So for those of you who haven't used it, Microsoft Teams is their version of Slack, plus other stuff. So this is building like a bot that can interact with things, and some really neat examples in there. One about sending a monthly reminder or a bi-monthly reminder, and the second one I thought was really neat was showing a caller ID when a phone call comes in to their system, which it was just a fun little idea that it would pop up in your Teams application too. So you can watch him implement those on the video, and we'll throw that link into the chat in the show notes. That was from Randy Brown at the Mid-Michigan ColdFusion users group.
Cool.
Okay, this next one from Ben is bound to cause some discussion. And, it says it in the title. It says, an opinionated guide, so there's the discussion already, to handling pull requests on my team. And there was an image he had associated with this that I think I first saw on Twitter about how, let's see, let me share my screen. Yes. If your pull request sits open for more than an hour, your team has failed you. Woo! There's disgust.
An hour.
Right?
Dang. Disgust.
So he obviously goes through why that's true for his team, and it's opinionated. But I like a lot of the stuff he says. I know we at Ortus definitely have pull requests open for more than an hour. So I'm not sure whether that is something we need to work on, or we've decided to have other trade-offs. But some of the things in this article that I love: keep PRs small. What's in the master or main branch should match what's in production. Review your own PR before submitting it. Let people know when the PR has been reviewed. Add pictures or videos. So all some great ideas.
Pictures
or
videos
of the changes. So like if you're working on something that has a UI change, show a picture of the new UI.
All right, fair enough.
Which I ask for all the time on our UI projects like CFCasts. Yes, I can download it. I can run it locally and then go see what it is. But like you have it up there. You're working on it. Just show me what it looks like. So there's some good things in there. Even if you read the part that says it shouldn't be open for more than an hour and you're like, yeah, right. It's okay. You can read the other points and take what you want from it. So I do understand the mindset, though, of getting PRs closed quickly, because the longer they're open, the more stale they become. often it's hard to move on to another task and then have to come back to that PR multiple times. It's nicer if there's a quicker feedback cycle. But, you know,
I mean,
each of our teams
I love
is
a
in
quicker
different
feedback cycle, but I kind of feel like that's something I've just had to live without. You know, I mean, especially like at Ortus, we live all, you know, remote, distributed around the world, different time zones. You know, a lot of us are on completely different projects. If I have a question for Luis, I mean, he may be in a call for the next 2 hours. I mean, I'm not necessarily going to get a review on the pull request.
Yeah. I think
So
one
I
thing
know it's
that
difficult.
helps that guide is he mentions that every team member can review anybody else's PR. That probably doesn't, well, I know it doesn't match much of the client work we work on, where there are specific people who want to review them. It also doesn't
Yeah.
work if you need somebody specific because of their domain knowledge. So again, if everybody can review the PR, it makes sense that you should be able to get somebody quicker, but your mileage may
Yeah,
vary.
I like Ben's little section in here. Your commit history should mirror the evolution of your application, not the journey of the engineer. And he has this example of commits. It's like, you know, WIP, work in progress. Another commit. Not sure why this is breaking. Another commit. WTF is going on. Another commit. More changes. Another commit. Trying something different. Another commit. FU code. Like I've probably written a few messages that looked a bit more like that while I was trying to get something. I mean, the worst thing is when you're debugging a build that's only fails on GitLab, and you're like debugging remotely in your GitLab build with like commit after commit. And you're like, I don't even know what to name these commit messages anymore. I hate doing that because the commit log is just trash.
I'll have to find it somewhere. There's a developer I followed that his guide was every commit is WIP, is WIP, work in progress,
Yeah.
until you merge it into the main branch. And then you squash it, you give it a real name. But he doesn't spend any time saying what he's doing until it's merged in, which is probably, you know, find the ground for you. But I definitely agree that I don't want my main commit history having all of yours. Is this working? Is this working now? You,
I know.
right, though.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
that's, the
Just
squash functionality
rebase, squash,
is nice. Yeah.
Great. Alrighty. Next one, we have a blog post by Mr. Matthew Clemente. And it is a blog post, not a video. I'm used to saying videos from Matt. This one is on a SQL function, specifically here in Postgres, but it is available in many other SQL database engines, with the greatest and least functions. You can think of these kind of like min and max, where you can use an update clause and in greatest pass in two different values and it will take the bigger of them, or least it will take the smaller. So this was useful for him. He was parsing some logs which could come in any order from different sources, and he wanted to increment the count for each log and set the last CNAT only to the greatest value. And so he could take in all the new values and it would keep the last CNAT, or it would keep the new value if it was greater. So I do believe this is on pretty much every database grammar. SQL Server was the only one he doesn't have linked here, but I'm sure they have one as well.
That's what I was trying to figure out, if they had that.
So a nice little SQL tip there from Matt. Thank you. Okay. Another Ben Nadal post, more discussion. He talks about how they have a ColdFusion monolith there at Envision that his team is working on. And he talks about how it helps them deploy very quickly. And he has a fun little graph here about the different deploys services. And his top one is CF projects. You see it's deployed way more often than the rest, which, to be fair, the rest are microservices. So the idea is you don't have to deploy the same thing as often. But he's talked about this before, that the monolith for their team in this instance helps them deploy fast, move fast, and they're even bringing things back into it all the time.
And deploy hella often.
Yes, that is the official tagline. So,
nice.
I know I love monolith applications, I get microservices and why they are useful in some cases. I think we have, as an industry, over microserviced things that don't need to be there yet.
Yeah, and I really liked Ben's. Yeah, I liked Ben's blog that he had a few months ago, kind of talking about like where's the breaking point. Does it really make sense to have 1,000 microservices, or does it really make sense to have stuff? And I had talked about that's why I like what ColdBox modules give you, because you can get a lot of the benefits of having stuff modular and self-contained and able to be ported around, but still inside of one build, one repo. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it comes down again to a lot of premature optimization, thinking like, oh, this is probably slow, or if we had, 100 times the traffic, this could hurt us. And it's like, sure. And when you have 100 times the traffic, like, put the work in.
Yeah, it's difficult, because what I've seen a few times is you have a lot of microservices that you start building, and then your overall page time sometimes can actually suffer because you have like 10, 15 HTTP calls that end up getting made out of the covers to hit all these different microservices to get all the data, whereas it used to be you just had embedded CF queries or embedded functionality, and it actually, you add some overhead the more you decouple and distribute your system. You add flexibility, you add scalability, you add all these different aspects, but you also add a bit of latency whenever you do that, which in addition to the build overhead and just the management overhead of all your repos. So these are very good conversations I think Ben's having about what makes sense.
As he says here, the point is it's all subjective and terribly contextual.
Period.
I think the only thing that scared me in his whole thing is he mentioned that when they bring things back into the monolith, they drop the tests. It says they have tests and they don't pour them back. I mean, I can see, I don't know, I've done things where we've gone forward without tests because we wanted to get it out, and then we go back and put tests in, but I don't know if I've ever thrown away tests that were already there.
But, yeah, I mean, unless the code was reorganized in a way with the tests were useless.
A different language, maybe they're pulling in something written in a different language. Anyways, it works for them. That just was one of those like, oh, okay, I like tests. They make me feel safe.
As soon as he said that, Eric was like, oh, I felt a disturbance in the testing universe. Somewhere a test was just thrown away.
I just am afraid to change anything without a test, because then I have to do all the testing myself, and I'm not the most thorough on that. So
yeah, I mean, I agree. I've been my share of lazy, but there was something for one of our clients just the other day that had started out as this simple little thing and had grown, and the cyclomatic complexity of it was just starting to get crazy with all these different if statements and business cases, and they had been manually testing it. And then, the client was like, we want to add a whole nother layer of, conditional checks for these other things that I was going to need to do some refactoring on to make possible. And I was like, all right, stop, hammer time. I'm writing tests for everything I have right now. Like, I'm going to hit all of these scenarios. And I used code coverage and test box to make sure I had all the if statements in there. And then once I had the test passing, then I did my refactoring that I needed to do, which, of course, as soon as I broke test, I was like, oh, that's right. And then I added the new functionality with tests driven at that point in time. And it was kind of like, man, I really should have had tests to begin with, in this, and I didn't. But it's, when you have it, it's such a nice feeling. Is if they asked me to go make another change to this, it was starting to be like this cringy, what am I going to break this time? But now I'd be like, yeah, I can add another feature to that. Like, I have full test coverage. I feel really comfortable now going in and, screwing around with it.
I hear you, though, on the, I wouldn't even call it lazy, but like in the initial playing around with the feature, when you're like, I don't know what I want this to be, like, tests can really slow you down there because you don't know what it's going to look like, you don't know what the functions are going to be called, you're just playing around. But there does come a point where you've decided, yes, this is good, now let's make sure we have something that backs up that it works. So in our quick workshop, so you'll see this if you're a CFCast subscriber coming out, when we start talking about testing and we want to add a new feature, the first thing that we do is go back and add tests around the existing like listing out of all of our posts in our blog. And then we do the feature that shows only published posts. Right? We make sure that it works before we start adding new things. So I think that's a perfectly fine way to go about it. And also, if you're in Ben's situation and you don't want the tests, you're trying to move fast, and that works for your team, cool. No one's going to arrest you. There's no testing police.
We may cancel you on Twitter, but we won't arrest you.
Okay, so there is a blog post from Adobe about those March 2021 updates. You can see you can see all of the bug fixes listed out, which is bug fixes, but you can see that there. Sorry, I just want more detail.
Yeah, I hadn't actually seen this post, but reading through it, I see it's nothing more than a few excerpts from the existing security bulletins. I did notice that 2021 mentioned some activation and deactivation of virtual core licenses, and that was a feature I don't think I had seen. I'm sure it had probably been mentioned in the pre-release. I'm really curious how that works, and if that's part of their cloud offerings, because it appears to be something that actually does like an online, you have to be connected to the internet, hits an activation server kind of thing, and you have to deactivate a server when you stop using it to move the licenses. I'm really kind of curious about that. Anyway, seeing it in that post reminded me about that.
All right. After that, we have a fun code kata from Ben Nadal about porting Lucy's system output function over to Adobe.
We've done that before. When Luis was testing his CB stream stuff, he had like a basic equivalent of that because he needed to test it on Adobe, and he couldn't just use system output on Lucy.
So, for those of you who haven't used Lucy, system output sends the text that you give it to Java's out stream, system out.
Mm-hmm.
It can take a new line argument, and the third argument is whether you want it to go to the error stream or not. So here you can see all these values going through. It will serialize complex values to JSON automatically. And
it's not necessarily JSON. It uses Lucy's internal serialize function, which is JSON-ish, but it's not necessarily actual. It's not the same as serialized JSON, just for what it's worth.
So if I pull up the the Lucy source code, will the object that comes out of there be called JSON-ish? Because that would be amazing. So
it'd be the Swiss German equivalent of that.
So here's his function. It's pretty simple. As he says, this is pretty awesome that you can use Cfml's invoke to invoke dynamic methods on Java classes. So some fun stuff there.
Yeah, it was fun seeing that. This is one of the many things that's just really useful in Lucy, and I wish Adobe would add. But of course, I doubt I've gone and put in a ticket for them to add it. There's 100 things I wish Adobe would add this in Lucy. I never used to write anything to the console out as a ColdFusion developer in the past, because the console logs went into some arcane text file on the server that how would I even get to it. But with command-box development, you spin up a server and you type server log -- follow, and you're just tailing the console output of the server. It's actually really handy because our ColdBox application templates all have a console appender baked in just out of the box, so your logging just goes out to the console. And if you want to just do some ad hoc one-off logging, you toss in the system output command and it just shows up in your server log. So I actually use that like all the time.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, we have on the ColdFusion forum a blog post about the MySQL connector J. So I believe this is a community MySQL connector, not the one built in if I'm reading this right. But the latest update changed some ways that it approaches time zones, which returns a local datetime Java object, which breaks all of ColdFusion's datetime functions. So if you do use connector J, for now stick on 8.0.22 and do not upgrade to .23.
This is on the ColdFusion blog?
Yeah, the ColdFusion portal, yep.
I'm curious. My first thought is, does this affect Lucy? And my second thought is there a ticket in for this already?
Yeah, I wasn't sure the relationship between this connector J and what is shipped in the JDBC drivers in Lucy and Adobe, but it sounded like in the blog post that this was a community version. So
interesting, but it still sounds like a fix that's necessary in ColdFusion, most likely for its state functions to be able to work with whatever this Java object is, which I suppose in a vacuum really would have nothing to do with the JDBC connector itself. It would just be, in general, allow ColdFusion state related functions to work with this Java class. Is what I think I'm reading.
Right. Exactly. Or parsing the local datetime Java class into the ColdFusion equivalent. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Last blog post, and then we have a couple tweets to round it out, is from Ben Nadal about casting dates between a date and a number. So in ColdFusion, you can represent dates as numbers, but not not the traditional like milliseconds from the Unix epoch, right? The what is it, January something 1970?
January 1st, I think.
There's a different one for the ColdFusion epoch, and it's represented as a double number of days, and after the decimal is the fractional time of the day. This is all interesting, I guess, but...
Well, that's not a date, though. That's just a time span representation, right?
Right. So you can use that double number.
Typical, yeah, that's typical in ColdFusion. Like the create time span function just returns an integer. I mean, it's all it is. And there's a lot of functionality. Like even in Lucy, you can do a CF loop to from, and you can count up. And I think it uses an integer 1 to mean 1 day, and decimals to be a fraction thereof.
Yeah, I guess the thing I found interesting was, I guess the ColdFusion epoch is December 30th, 1899. Like, it's just a different day, and if you do Ben has in here, if you add 0 to that decimal value, it will convert it based on that day. Like, there's just some weird things. So here's my screen. Basically, this value right here is the numeric representation of March 20th, 2021, and I can see this biting me in the butt for sure. Some code that says, hey, look, that looks like a date, and you're like, no, it's just a decimal number. And so, we've talked about it before, how it's one of the things with our dynamic programming language that can be difficult is dates represented as numbers, and which one did you want. So I don't know. It's just something to be aware of, and I guess it's interesting if you want to go through and see how those get converted back and forth.
It's funny. There was someone in Cfml Slack the other day who was dealing with some like phone switching system, and it was sending him back dates as some giant integer number, but it wasn't like a typical epoch, but it appeared to have some sort of like starting point that appeared to be random, and he's trying to like reverse engineer like how to convert it to a date. Just made me think of that. That system must have used some other random date for their epoch.
Right. It did make me sad that there doesn't seem to be any built-in function on ColdFusion or Lucy for seconds since 1970, right? I know a few APIs return timestamps in that format, and converting them back into dates is just a little more of a hassle than I wish it was. So there you go. I should probably go enter a ticket. It's not hard. It's just
I've said before, what if the world got rid of time zones and it was like 5:00 p.m. everywhere in the world at the same time, and then you would just adjust based on where you lived as to what time you went to work? Would that be any easier? You wouldn't have to ever convert anything. Scheduling meetings would be just super simple.
I mean,
just going to throw that out there for the powers that be that listen to our podcast to consider. When the New World Order hits, get rid of the time zones. Or at least daylight savings time. I mean,
I did read, this is totally not what is our strong suit in talking about, but I'm going to talk about it anyways. Did find out that the Secretary of Transportation in the United States has control over time zones for the U.S. So technically he could move like Maine into the Hawaii time zone without having any laws passed. He can just do that. And I thought, that's interesting.
Wow, just unilateral control over that. Doesn't need the legislature.
Nope. So that's kind of crazy.
That's hilarious, actually.
So, anyways, let's go finish off with a couple tweets that we have. share my screen here again. We got some love from Gary Knight on Twitter, specifically for CommandBox. Brad, you have done a great job with CommandBox, and we're not the only ones that think so. Gary thinks so as well.
You don't know how much I had to pay him to make that tweet.
We won't go into that. And then I love your little teaser here of an upcoming CommandBox UI improvement with tables.
Yeah, which you contributed.
That's true. That's why I love it. So some great things coming up in the next version of CommandBox. What is that version going to be, by the way?
It'll probably be 5.3.0. I'm actually considering cutting it soon. I just want to finish, put it in some of those async manager changes that I talked about, which requires me to actually have time to do that.
Oh, time. If we were all in the same time zone, would that give you more time?
Yeah, I'm pretty certain. I don't know how, but we'll say yes.
Awesome. And the last one is something I saw on Twitter that I thought was pretty awesome. It's this application called Grex, and it's like reverse regex. So you give it a string, and it gives you a regex that matches that string. So here shared on my screen, yes, right? Here shared on my screen is a video of that going. Let's see how big I can make it. So he gave 4 patterns here, and it gives them a regex that matches all 4 patterns. Which is really nice because you could give it like 3 different URL patterns that you want to match, and it'll give you a regex out like that. And even if it's not perfect, it probably is closer and easier to adjust than creating it from scratch. So as a person who has a very hate-love relationship with regex, I thought this was pretty awesome.
I wonder how it works. So it works in opposite. You give it the things. It's almost like like machine learning. You give it a series of strings that match the thing you're looking for, and then it tries to guess what your regular expression would actually be for what it is you're looking for. That's super interesting.
Right. I love that you can give it multiple patterns and it will find the commonalities. So
yeah,
pretty awesome.
That seems like it would seem easy, but would possibly be very hard.
Yeah, I would never want to write this. So whoever wrote this,
I'm like, okay, use a string diffing, functionality. You find the similar characters in the string, but then you're like, but that would get really complicated.
Right. I'm whoever wrote this is smart, and I don't know what language is this in. I'm pulling it up on GitHub now. Grex is written in something Rust. Of course, it's written in Rust. Everything command line is written in Rust nowadays.
All right.
You've heard it.
Scott Steinbeck, as soon as you're done with that JMES implementation, we need a Grex command in CommandBox. Go.
Alrighty. So I think that takes us through the news of the week. And we are on to Find a Job. There is one new job this week listed on CFMLjobs.com. It is a full-time senior software developer. And I love this. It says at Anywhere, United States. And when I read that, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a town called Anywhere somewhere in the United States.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So I believe it's remote,
USA.
And you can be anywhere in the U.S. But
it's like the press any key, cartoon.
Where's the any key? Yeah. Some other jobs from the webs. We have a job listed at cfwebtools.com. They're looking to hire a full-time experienced systems administrator. You can work remotely. Their office is located in Omaha, Nebraska. We will add that to the show notes and here in the chat as well.
Their office is located in flyover country. Actually, not too far from me.
I'm not sure how... Did you just give yourself a self-own there? Naming
all of us in this part of the country know we're in flyover country.
I've flown into Kansas City. It's a nice place. Okay. And as a special tease here, we do have a special job posting coming up soon that will be posted in the next week or so. Pay attention to our podcast next week. Great company, benefits, modern thinking CF developer, fully remote. There's your tease for next week's jobs. Okay. ForgeBox module of the week. We have a repeat. I was gonna say repeat offender. A repeat module, and that is the CF format module, commandbox-cfformat. And we've gone through this before. CF format is created by John Berquist, and it's a way to apply formatting rules and automatically format your code. I love this because then I can have my rules in my repo, and you can write your code however you want, and then I format it how I wanted it, and none of us have to agree on it because I make it happen automatically. In fact, I have a GitHub action. I'll have to find it as we've been switching our repos build processes from Travis to GitHub. There is a action that formats it and then commits the changes straight to that branch that you're on. So you push up your code. If it didn't match my formatting, I don't care. I'm pushing up another commit that makes it match. So you don't even have to do anything on your side. I love it. Some things I wanted to show before, and I think it's right down here. There is a settings wizard that you can run. So if you haven't used CF format, you don't have a formatting settings file that you want, you can run the wizard and it will show you examples of each and every rule, what it looks like, and then you can choose one and it will generate it for you. So that's a great way to get started, especially with a lot of settings in CF format, right? And you can get it exactly how you'd like it to look. So this is a great project. I try to put CF format on all the things I touch. I will say if you do integrate it in your project, make a dedicated pull request to do it all at once, because it does not mess up, but it's kind of hard if you get a pull request to review and they're like, I changed this one thing. Also, I formatted the file and it says I changed like 80 lines. So
1,000 lines.
So do it in the PR that you're not changing anything else.
Yeah, and since it's likely going to touch everything, if it's your first format, if you have several of the team members, be like, all right, everybody, like, don't do any local work you haven't committed. Let's format the code, get it merged in. Everybody pulls, otherwise you'll get a bunch of conflicts if there's other development. Yeah, the CF format has like a zillion options, and there's some commands built in that will list out all of the options and show you examples of what it looks like and what it means. There's even a little wizard you can do that'll build a CF format JSON file based on your likings. So you can kind of go through and say, oh yeah, I like my curlies to be there. Oh yeah, I like colons instead of equals, blah, blah, blah. When you're done, it's like, okay, here's your magic JSON file, put it in the web root, and now you can format all your code. So it's pretty sweet.
Yeah, the settings approach is kind of the opposite of Prettier for JavaScript, where Prettier was sent out there as like, hey, we only have like 5 settings, and CF format is out there saying, hey, you can make it look exactly how you want. So,
ironically, part of that is, in my opinion, from the fact that nobody ever wants to be opinionated in the ColdFusion world. It's always, everybody wants to be their own little unique butterfly and do their own random deploys and their own random frameworks and their own random formatting. If this were like the Ruby world, it'll be like, no, you will format your code and you will like it like this. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Or
but
Go, I think, has a formatter built into like when you download the development toolkit. Yeah. So
just
like
right across the board.
Yeah. So there's a few like that. On the Git history part, I did see a joke on Twitter. Somebody with Prettier, but the same thing applies. They said they have somebody who ran Prettier on their repo, a coworker, and ever since, whenever they're going to go see who changed this line last, the Git blame, most of the lines are this coworker. It's just that funny, a funny artifact of using formatting the first time is whoever does it is all of a sudden going to own every line of code in your repo. So the Git blame will always blame them. Okay. Our VS Code hint, tips, and tricks of the week. This week we chose the GitLab workflow extension. This is an official extension from GitLab. You can connect it to either the hosted or an on-premise edition, and you can do it based on each workspace, right? So If you work for multiple clients, have multiple GitLab instances, you can configure this extension to look at the right one depending on which workspace you have. I originally looked at this one because of GitLab CI. I wanted something that could autocomplete for me in GitLab CI and could validate it. They have their little lint tool, and excuse me, it's always frustrating to have to wait till I push it up to be told, hey, you messed up. And even then, it doesn't tell me what I mess up. I have to like click into their UI and copy and paste it. So this gets rid of all that and just tells me right here in VS Code. It can do a lot more with listing pull requests, issues, showing you the value of the last pipeline run, creating a retry in pipelines. Here's an example of their issue tracking where you can actually write a comment. So there is a ton of things you can do all from VS Code without having to pull up the GitLab interface itself. You can create different queries to show you issues that you would like to have in the sidebar. And I want to pull open, here's the validating the GitLab CI configuration. Excuse me. And variable auto completion. So it even gives you all of the environment variables provided to you, which is so nice. I mean, I have that page bookmarked, but I love having it in my editor even more. So it's a great extension. Again, if you're using GitLab like we are, you can download this and hook it up to yours today. Alrighty, that brings us here to the end of our podcast and our chance to thank all of our Patreon supporters. Thank you for supporting this podcast, all of our open source tools like CommandBox, ForgeBox, ColdBox, ContentBox, TestBox, all the other boxes. You can sign up and learn more at patreon.com/ortussolutions. Anybody who signs up...
We've also reorganized those, right?
Yes, anybody who signs up for a bronze package and up, you will get a ForgeBox Pro and a CFCast subscription as a perk. You have access to a special room on our Ortus community website and get a little badge as well. Mm-hmm. And there are other perks on higher packages as well. So we want to thank everybody who is supporting us there. And Brad, how about you take us through that list?
Sure. Thank you to our Patreon supporters, Don Bellamy, Eric Hoffman, David Bellinger, Gary Knight, Giancarlo Gomez, Jonathan Parrott, Mario Rodriguez, Jeffrey McGee from Sunstar Media, John Wilson from Synaptrix, Yogesh Mathur, Joseph Lamory, Ben Liddell, Brett DeLine, Carl Von Stetten, Charlie Earhart, Dan Carr, Daniel Garcia, Didier Lesnicki, Edgardo Cabezas, Jan Yannick, Jason Diger, Jeff McClain, Jeremy Adams, Jonas Erickson, Jordan Clark, Kai Koenig, Laxma Tirhordati, Gavin always says that one better than me, Leon Saramelis, I think, Matthew Darby, Matthew Clemente, Mingo Hagen, Patrick Flynn, Ross Phillips, Scott Steinbeck, Stephanie Monge, and Stephen Klotz. I used to be able to do that in one breath. That list has gotten pretty big. I don't think I could do that anymore.
And that's how we like it. Awesome. Thank you so much for supporting us. Thanks for joining us for the news this week. And have a great one. And we will see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Show notes for this episode can be found at cfmlnews.modernizeordie.io, where you can also subscribe to your favorite podcast player like Spotify or iTunes. We also have the link to YouTube to find more videos just like this. The music used in this podcast is under a royalty-free license from Sound.com and Blue Tree Audio.